Okay, I believe we're live. And if we are, hello. Hello to you all out there. I'm Alan Schimmel. I am the CEO of Techstrong Group and the editor-in-chief for DevOps.com, Cloud Native Now, Security Boulevard, as well as the host at Techstrong.tv. And I probably do some other things that I don't remember or I want to admit to here on in public. But for today, I am your host. And this is another great webinar learning skill up session brought to you by the good people of PeopleCert, as well powered by our Techstrong learning platform here. And we have a great webinar with two fantastic guests to speak to you about today, how to create a DevOps workflow using only open source tools and platforms. And, we were talking off camera before we started today. Well, we were on camera, but we weren't live. How blessed we are to be in the DevOps space where we have such a plethora and a richness of DevOps tools and platforms that are open source to pull upon, and hopefully we'll bring some of those out to you today. Before we begin, though, let me do a little bit of housekeeping. We use something called the Big Marker webinar system. You're on it right now. We like it. There's no plugins. There's no finkling or fudging with stuff. It just works. For most of you who are watching this in your web browser, on the right-hand corner of your screen of the browser, you will see the Big Market Communications window. And it starts, usually most of you will be drawn to the big chat in dark, black, bold letters. And underneath chat, it says public and private and Twitter. For today's webinar, that public chat is open. And if you want to maybe ask a question of the audience, ask a question of our panel, have a comment, I highly, did I say highly, encourage you to use that chat window to communicate with us. It's when it works well, it's great. So you'll see I already put in there, I'm saying hello today from Boca Raton, Florida. We have people here already from Brazil and Argentina. That's great. Texas. Next to the word chat, though, you'll see another. It's grayed out for most of you because it's not highlighted, but it's the Q&A tab. And that is a great place if you have a question specifically for our panel today. Please put your question in there, and we will do our best to get it answered to you from our fantastic panel. I'm going to introduce our panel in one more second. I did mention that this was a PeopleCert, DevOps Institute, a PeopleCert company webinar. And both of our panelists today are members of the DevOps Institute Ambassador Program, DevOps Ambassadors. And it's 200 some odd people strong and some of the leading lights in the DevOps space. We're lucky to have two of them with us here today, but I want to give a shout out to all of the DevOps ambassadors. They do a great job. A lady named Helen Beal runs the ambassador program, and she's done amazing things with it. That being said, let me now get to our panelists for today. First gentleman I want to introduce you to is someone I haven't had the pleasure of seeing before the plague, as they say, right? And but he's well known not only in the DevOps space, but in ITIL and Prince and all over the education and IT space as well. David Tomlinson, Tomo, and David, I don't want to embarrass you, but why don't you introduce yourself?
Indeed. I got my first job in tech where I had to answer the phone if someone had a problem, and I didn't realize it was a service desk. And amazingly, the technology has changed, but most of the problems haven't. And as we'll see that as we go through. I spend most of my time leading people through things like DevOps leader courses, SRE courses, but also getting them to relate with things like service management. And I contributed to the Agile service management piece. I have this real passion for open source. But also I understand, because I hear it almost every day, the battle sometimes that managers have to get acceptance of open source tooling from governance, risk, and compliance. So I've been a security officer, Alan. I've walked both sides of that street, so I know what that feels like. My background in tech included 26 years in the military, 15 of them part-time, 11 of them full-time in the Royal Corps of Signals. So I come from a hardware as well as a software techie background. And, still learning. I still put myself down as, yes, I'm a teacher, but I'm also a student. And I'm learning about every course I run, Alan. There is a new tool on there I haven't heard of. And somebody will introduce it to me, and I'll learn something new every single time, every single day. And it's happened to me twice already this week, and it's only Wednesday. It's a continuous learning experience. And Alan, when I get bored and tired of this, Alan, you can come to my funeral, because up till that point, I'm going to be.
Well, you're assuming I'll be around by then, but
listen, as the great Yogi Berra said, you've got to go to people's funerals, otherwise they don't come to yours.
I get that. All right. Sergio, excuse me.
Yes, well, it's going to be a challenge. Yes, Alan, it's going to be a challenge to follow you guys. I mean, the stories you have and the introduction you have, and I'm going to try to keep up with that, no, and raise the bar. So I'm an ex-football player, if we go there now. So I was a professional football player. And then
Really?
I started doing IT. And I started it in a kitchen, It's back in the days in Romania when outsourcing became a thing. The business model was that you rent an apartment as an entrepreneur, and ideally you have 4 rooms. But if you scale, you have to scale in the kitchen. So I was the junior starting in the kitchen. And I was doing that like 20 years ago. But since then, things have changed a lot. And looking back, it's crazy to see where all begin. I was an engineer most of my life, for the last 20 years. And I believe I was a DevOps all of my life, but I didn't know that before DevOps became a DevOps. And then you look at the qualities and the principles that the DevOps needs to have. And then I said, no, I check most of these qualities, and I really embraced the principles early on, whether I knew it or not. So it really fit like a glove. And was a very smart move from my point of view. I really feel natural in this space. And as you said, it's like you have to be driven by this continuous need to improve yourself. I call it more like you have to embrace your imperfections. You know that if you do engineering for a lot of time, you understand that you can't reach to a perfect state because everything is changing too fast. So if you embrace that imperfection and you move it into the continuous perfection of that imperfection, then you're going to end up doing great stuff. And I'm doing DevOps officially now for the last 5 years. I led several digital transformations, and successful one, if you ask me. I hope the others agree with that. And I'm happy to be here and share the stage with you.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you on. Sergio, one question I got to ask you. How do you pronounce your last name correctly?
It's Petian.
Sergio Petian. Okay.
Perfect.
I'll do the best we can, but I have a funny New York accent, and we do what we can in New York. Anyway, welcome everyone. So as I mentioned, I think briefly, today's webinar is how to create a DevOps workflow using only open source tools and platforms. But let me say from the outset, I don't know if that's going to be 100% of what you hear today. Many, with the concept of what we call open core, open source, right? The core of some of these tools and platforms are certainly open source. And then there are kind of freemium, premium add-ons that may or may not be open source and may or may not be free. And that's okay, right? But let's make sure we understand what we mean and what we're doing there. That being said, I want to start with a question for both David and Sergio. When we say DevOps workflow, let's start right there. What do we mean by a DevOps workflow? Are we referring to this, platform engineering? Are we referring to the CI/CD pipeline? What are we referring to? What does DevOps workflow mean to you? David, Sergio, I'd like you both to weigh in, but let me throw it out at the audience too. I'd love for you guys to put in the public chat. What does a DevOps workflow mean to you? David, why don't you kick us off?
Well, if you ask 12 DevOps engineers what the workflow is, you'll get 14 answers. And I think part of that point is, sure, it very much started with the frustration of, testers saying, how does development relate to operations? And it sort of grew in both directions from there. But actually, we've now got people saying, well, does it start from the initial requirements and initial input? Is therefore the word processor you write it down in part of the workflow? I suppose at some level it is. And of course, thanks to SRE, we now have, monitoring in live now is a much bigger thing. And this idea of being much more end to end and with chaos engineering going on in live as well. So if you've asked me this question 4 years ago, you'd have had a different answer. But I now see it as being far more encompassing than I used to, because I now realize that actually it goes from here, which is a demand for something, to there, which is value. And everything in between must be on there somewhere. Whether you want to call it, with my ITIL head on, the service value chain, whatever you want to call it, it's in there somewhere. And I think the more holistically we deal with it, I think the better we become, because we don't then sub-optimize. One of the problems, if you just look at it as being a platform, or you look at it as being just a particular part of the pipeline, you will optimize it there, but sub-optimize it somewhere else. So I think holistically makes more sense. But yeah, I can't get a definitive answer out of any of the groups that I teach, because everybody comes to this from a slightly different point of view. And I had somebody the other day go, so is Jenkins really part of the pipeline then? And you go, yeah, I think it probably is. But I just thought that was an orchestration tool. And an orchestration tool isn't. And then you realize that their interpretation of what is or isn't tooling, differs enormously from one person to the next. I suppose, Alan, if you're to ask most of my students, if it appears on the periodic table of DevOps tools, people will probably give it a shout and say, well, that's on there somewhere. But that's not, I think, necessarily 100% definitive. And neither should it be, because at the end of the day, Alan, your DevOps and my DevOps aren't necessarily the same DevOps, but they're both DevOps. they have to be.
You're 100% correct. Absolutely. I love that's a great way to end it. Before we run to you, I just wanted to mention Naren put in one here. Ability to get automated and streamlined across the SDLC. That was something similar to what I mentioned. We'll come back to it. But Sergio, give you your chance. What does DevOps workflow mean to you?
I'm probably very biased here, but I do see it as a platform engineering in the first place. And what do I mean by that? It's mainly, I would say, holistic. I would go in what David said is the holistic approach to cloud native stack. It's basically a journey probably that every single DevOps team has to take. And depending, of course, on your environment, you might grow into a platform engineering sooner or later, because it's really all about addressing all the needs that the cloud native company needs to tackle. That implies, of course, DevSecOps, which is shifting left on security. Then you do SRE, which is shifting left on operational responsibility and qualities. And of course, software release process is the main component of doing it. Involving everyone as early as you can, because if you shift left, then you have to empower every single stakeholder to have a saying in how the code is being released and being operated. So all that goes hand in hand. Now it's like an effect a feedback effect that goes all around. And then you have to bring compliance, and then you have to bring other stakeholders like business in the conversation. And if you go on that journey, you're going to understand that you need to handle the whole DevOps culture and the whole DevOps stack in a completely different manner. It's not something isolated. It's not even something for engineers, but it's something that has to address the whole organization. I call it org ops, because basically everybody has to have a saying in how software is being operated. And there are so many, I would say, innovation coming in this field. I mean, we have this amazing landscape from CNCF where all the open source tooling is addressing every single problem that you might imagine, and even some problems that you don't yet imagine, like chaos engineering and AI ops and many other things that are now reality and can finally be addressed. So yeah, that would be my interpretation of a workflow. It's the holistic approach of a cloud native stack of a modern company running all digital.
You know what I love about that, Sergio? You didn't really talk about tools a lot. You talked about concepts and culture and groups of people, because I think that's something that's missing from the title of this webinar. You can't create a DevOps workflow using only open source tools and platform, because you can't have DevOps with just tools. DevOps is about people. DevOps is about culture. DevOps is about, the people process technology piece of this. And so to me, the title's almost a little bit of a red herring, right? In that we need more than that for sure. I wanted to mention two other folks here in the audience. It's Asco and Artemi. If I mispronounce names, I apologize. They also put some good, what they consider to be their workflows. Getting developers, test engineers, and operation collaborate together in a reliable, safe, consistent way to bring value to customers. I love that. That's a great one too. Artemi, feedback loop of product delivery from code producer to product consumer in a development context. That's certainly, we go back to Gene Kim's 3 ways in the Phoenix Project, right? Those feedback loops, certainly part of that. Good stuff in there. But I think it's important, and we'll keep that in mind for the rest of our discussion today, that we can't have a true DevOps workflow without people and process, not just technology and tools. What we did talk about a little here was platform engineering. And I know when we were talking, in the green room before we went live, we were afraid maybe some people in the audience would think that DevOps workflow is really the domain of a platform engineer, kind of setting up the rules, the guardrails of the world, of the environment that the developer and DevOps engineers and SREs and so forth work within. And that's the sort of your DevOps workflow. But you know what, from what both of you said and what we've heard from the audience, no, that's not it. I think those are guardrails, they're not workflow. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, Alan. I think, what was it? One platform to rule them all, one platform to find them, one platform to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. It is very much, I think people want to hold on to this idea that we get this silver bullet or this golden ring that means that we now become omnipotent. I think that's just human nature, Alan. I don't think that's got anything to do with the tooling or the platform itself. I think we all want to think that we can find that, the Excalibur sword that's going to solve all our problems, But in reality, I've used loads of Excalibur swords over the years, and they've changed. And Alan, they'll change again because it will.
They probably will. You're right. That. So, being in the technology space for the long time that I've been, nice way of saying I'm old. One thing for sure is that the technology and the tools change constantly. Anyway, be that as it may, now that we've kind of defined when we talk about DevOps workflow, we're talking about the whole enchilada, right? From contemplating what we want an application or software to do, to developing that software, testing that software, right? Deploying software, getting feedback loops in place on that deployed software, feeding it back, iterating, reiterating, continuous improvement. great way of looking at DevOps workflow, this whole SDLC. Now, but let's do focus in here on the open source tools and platforms that are available to help create a DevOps workflow. I can't help but think back to when I started DevOps.com. It was 2013. DevOps was already a thing. Wasn't what it is today, but it was a thing. But what were the big, and they were mostly all open source tools, right? But the big players back then were tools like Chef, and Puppet, and Ansible, Jenkins. I think Jenkins probably had 90+% of the CI market at that point, right? 90+%. It was the CI tool. There were some other little ones and commercial guys that were out there, but it was Jenkins. Interestingly, the CDF, the Continuous Delivery Foundation at Linux Foundation, recently did a survey. Jenkins still has 43%. 43% of the CI market, people use Jenkins still. It's still a power out there. So to me, those were the open source tools 10 years now, right? From 10 years ago. Jenkins is still out there. Chef and Puppet are still out there, but they've both been sold to other entities, and they don't, the whole cloud native Kubernetes thing had really changed how we do, configuration and so forth. But David, Sergio, let's just throw some names out there, and I'd like, again, our audience maybe could throw some names out as well, or maybe they can comment on some of the names we're talking about. Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Jenkins. David, Sergio, some names from you guys.
Well, this will always, Alan, get into my favorite tool discussion, because that's what they always degenerate into. But I had somebody the other day say, we can't use Terraform because we're special. Well, it's 2,000 plugins. How special are you? And I think that, there are things like, we've seen a fork now of Terraform. There's now an open Terraform, which is moving away from HashiCorp, which is fine.
Well, let's stop there a second.
Yeah.
How, for our audience's education, why are they moving away from HashiCorp? Well, because HashiCorp has sort of taken a different path on open source, right? They've taken Terra out of open source, though. Well, this is a discussion for another day over what is open source. But if you're a paying customer, you get the source code. But if you're a non-paying customer, I believe you don't, and that's the new Hashi license, a commercial license, and that's not source code.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm not going to be Richard Stallman here, and, I'm not a GNU Linux, and I'm not going to be, you can't use a codec because it's, we can only have open source. I think we most of us realize that most of what we do is actually going to have some hybrid elements to it. But fundamentally, I think the open source ethos that runs through all these tools, I think is very much part of, the best people to decide what an engineer wants is probably another engineer, not a salesperson. I think that's the fundamental place it's all coming from. And it's that level of trust that we have in something being open source as opposed to, hidden behind a paywall or being commercial. It may be very good software. It may do a very good job, but there's this element of trust and not so much control, but the idea that it's in the open and therefore we can, contribute to it. I'm no great coder, but, I don't mind, writing a man page or two, contributing in a small way, because, no, Alan, nobody wants my basic skills from 1988, but
Surprise.
but fundamentally, I can still contribute to some extent because I believe in the ethos, and I think that's important. But there is a certain amount of mongrel vigor that says, this fork will either work or it won't. It'll either take off or it won't. But my belief is that fundamentally, we have this distrust from the open source community of, being behind that paywall means I can't see what's going on. And that always concerns me about, the overall direction. Is it still being done for the purpose of the engineer, or is it being done for a commercial angle? Because the one thing open source projects don't really worry about too reality. They do it because there's a need for it. They don't tend to do things because they think it will sell well. That's not normally what the motive. I mean, I've hung out in some of these forums with them, and everybody's going, "Woo! 500,000 downloads." So what?
The numbers are staggering, though, and there's something to be said. There is something to be said for 500,000 or 2 million or 4 million downloads. I mean, some of these, the numbers are staggering.
But to be honest, if that was me, I'd just be glad that one other person was using something I wrote, because at the end of the day, that's one more person being helped. And I think that's a lot of the ethos, which is about that. It's where this movement came from, by engineers for engineers, with an engineering idea. And the further we move away from that, I think the more difficult that conversation becomes.
Yeah.
But certainly, I mean, I get people asking all the time, this is great, and I want to use these open source tools, but how do I persuade my governance and risk manager that this is a good way of going forward? And it's about making
that was
argument.
a huge. I'm reminded of a story, David. Years ago, I co-founded a security company, and I'm at a U.S. Army installation in Colorado. And I asked the Duma, who is the information assurance officer at the U.S. Army base, I said, "What are you doing around Wi-Fi security?" He laughs at me. He said, "Wi-Fi security, we don't worry about that. We don't have Wi-Fi. We don't allow Wi-Fi on base." And as he's telling me this, we're walking along the office, in the office there, and I'm watching people as he comes unplug their WAFs and their WAPs and throw them under the desk. And then as soon as he walks by, they plug them back in because they were all running their own Wi-Fi. So, it's the same thing with open source. The tighter you try to grasp it, the more the sand slips through. Today, 90-something% of enterprises use open source. I don't think we have that bias against open source that we've had in years past. And so, and I think that is reflected in some of these staggering download numbers and community numbers that we see. The audience has put out a couple of good ones here that I want to bring to the fore. One is Argo CD, right? And not Freshworks. Maybe it is Freshworks. No, I don't remember. I forgot who are the people who are behind Argo, but it's certainly part of CNCF now.
It's Intuit. Intuit is a company that's now investing and making Argo CD one of the most popular open source projects in the world. So that's really amazing.
No, but Dan Garfield, and I could look him up while I'm thinking here. But anyway, Argo is a perfect example, though. It really has become sort of the GitOps, if you will, CI/CD tool. And what's nice about it is it encompasses shift left. It is open. It allows developers to work right and get it. Allows testers to work and get it. Allows your security people and DevOps people to really kind of deploy. And it's also, it's kind of cloud native, right? So if that's your compute stack, it's a fantastic tool, and I would recommend everyone. Sergio, it sounds like you're more familiar with it perhaps than I. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Of course. I mean, I could name the lot of tools which we are using, which we made part of our platform engineering. I would start with Argo. Argo, it's for us was decisive. And it makes so many right decision by just following and adopting the right tooling at the right time, because they force you to do GitOps, or they encourage you in such a great manner that you have no other logical option but to adopt GitOps. And once you go that way, you're gonna go to the whole ecosystem. Now, once you make a certain decision, the whole world is opening up in front of you, and then you're gonna go for a Tekton, maybe to complement the CT, and then from there you get to another place, and then you have a different level of observability, so you can inject SRE modern tools, which again are coming from the open source space. You can go to, of course, you're going to need the Grafana and the whole PAG stack together with the Thanos, because now you're going to collect millions of metrics that you need to think what to do with, and then you're going to go in the AI ops. So it's a journey. As long as you follow the best principles and you're aligned in an ecosystem that is moving with full speed, with little effort, you're going to move extremely fast. And that's the magic of open source, because when you look at and we're living in the golden age of open source. We see that also with generative AI, the whole LM. Now the whole effort and the whole energy around open source, it's extremely amazing to embrace, and there are so many benefits. It's really amazing, honestly. I'm enjoying this age extremely a lot, because you have so many options. And I tend to agree with you. Like, companies are less risk adverse when it comes with open source, but that's so logical, because when you do a simple SBOM, or you do a simple assessment of your stack, you realize that 90% plus of your stack it's coming from open source. So you just have to look into your own kitchen to understand that you are a huge consumer of open source, and you're not maximizing the impact of your open source. If you don't consume it and you don't put it in your strategy, you'll always lag behind the whole industry, and you'll find something that you cannot fight, instead of embracing it and making it a strategic advantage. I'm going, of course, in the direction of OSPO, so building an open source program office for every single digital company. It's a must-have from my point of view. I'm extremely biased here, because I'm the one pitching the OSPO in our organization, and I'm very happy to see that more and more people are embracing the idea.
Absolutely. And it much more so. Someone mentioned another tool here that I'd want to talk about, and that's GitLab. And I'm good friends with, I've got many friends at GitLab, from Sid Sarangi, the CEO, on down, Ashley Kramer. What's your take on that? Open source, not open source? Because yes, it's open source, and you could certainly use just the open source version of GitLab. It's released every month. But so much, it's truly open core, right? I would say the majority of people using GitLab are probably paying and using some of the freemium modules. But that's my take on it. Sergio, David, your take on it, and I'll throw it out to the audience. Are you using just pure open source GitLab? If so, let us know. David, Sergio, any thoughts on that one?
Certainly true of the people I come across in my seminars. Most of them are using them with plugins and with those extra features. And the best thing is, I don't think they care. I know that sounds a terrible thing to say, but fundamentally, what they're looking for is something that does what they need to do. And they like the fact that, yeah, of course, it's open source overall, but I think you're right. I don't think people have necessarily the theological problem, as it were. So very much so. Whenever I introduce a GitLab discussion, it quickly emerges that they're using those add-ins rather than just the pure version, and quite rightly so. I mean, at the end of the day, it's there to do a job, right? That's what the thing is there for. And it does it very well. But the core, yes. But I don't see anybody out there being, shall we say, a zealot about it and saying I wouldn't do that because there is, what's the quickest route? Because, of course, as we know, open source isn't free. The source code is free, but, it still takes training. It still takes support. So from that point of view, paying for a shortcut is not such a bad idea.
And you know what, David? That's a great way of looking at it. I don't know if I've ever heard it said that way.
I believe we lost Alan for a second.
We might have lost Alan. We'll fill in the meantime, but I don't know if that's your experience, Sergio, that people are looking for a solution, not necessarily looking for necessarily an end-to-end open source.
Well, open source, as you said, doesn't mean free, and I would go even beyond that. I would say open source doesn't mean open future. So you always, here I'm touching a topic which I'm extremely passionate about, which I call digital sovereignty on the innovation side, because you might decide to go for an open source that offers the full DevOps experience for you, but then you become what you shouldn't become, which is a consumer. I believe DevOps, with the continuous improvement mindset, you should be very much concerned about your creation. You want to be able to create stuff. And that's the engine behind the whole open source motivation. You feel like your contribution matters and you are creating together with others, and that makes you a better engineer at the end of the day. And this is extremely important because when you go into platform engineering, when you look on the things where you really get innovative about, it's at the intersection of this tooling. Like if you fully own the CI/CD and you fully own the observability part, then it's so easy for you to go into the DORA metrics or to go into the SRE, and then you get creative in that space. That's the intersection of multiple areas that you have to control in order to be able to create further, right? So if you adopt an open source that solves everything for you, you're becoming a consumer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that it's very easy to slip into being passive when in actual fact it's a community, and that's really what drives open source. And I think that the point being made in the chat there was it's okay to make money out of this as long as you're giving back. 99% of the use of this is going to be either commercial or government spending money to provide a service. And if you're using it commercially, making money is not a dirty word, but you want it to give back. People forget the generosity of organizations. Jenkins was once Hudson, and it was donated. And there still is, a worthy background of organizations that still donate time, money, effort. I don't know, Alan, if you want to go into the thorny business of the EU's Cyber Resilience Act and their sort of, shall we say, difficulty understanding the model. But,
So that is, and I'm familiar with it. I've actually done interviews on that. I think it's kind of outside of our purview right now.
Yeah, sure.
But take us down a nest I don't want to go, or a route we don't want to go. But, anytime the government tries to legislate what is, it's a thorny issue. We'll leave it at that. But there are some other great workflow tools that have been mentioned here that I want to bring up. Techstrong is one. Again, I think under CDF. Maven and Gradle, those were two big ones. When I first started DevOps.com, there were a lot of people using that. I think what we've seen with the cloud native stack has sort of replaced or put a serious crimp in some of these, open source tools that we used back then. But they've been replaced by new open source tools like Argo for instance. What about open source testing though, guys, right? That's part of our open source workflow. Right? And integrated, continuous, automated testing. Right? And again, we're blessed in DevOps. We have, platforms like Selenium, for instance, that are open source. And then we have a bunch of, commercial solutions that sit on top of these open source tools. What about those? David, Sergio, I'm wondering if you have any experience on those, any thoughts?
I think the majority of the people I work with are using, Selenium, but it's normally Selenium Plus. So they're often using it with their own tools.
Agreed.
The idea, though, that when you ask people what's your biggest challenge with this style of engineering, continuous testing continuously comes up as the thing. It's the one that they've got probably the most challenge. And I go back to Sergio's point a little bit earlier when you talked about, it's a people thing and shifting left. I remember having a team that said, we used to invite those guys. Yeah, they used to come to kickoff meetings. And I go, why don't you do it anymore? And he said, they ask too many awkward questions. These guys just ask too many awkward questions. They started asking about things we'd much rather not discuss. And I think, therefore, the barrier isn't so much the technology. I think the barrier is this idea of we still have in some parts of the developer community this idea that testing is other and it's somebody else. And they're almost slightly frightened of it. And I think that having it open source means at least that there isn't we can't afford those testing tools. I can't afford the download. At least for that, we've removed that excuse. But we probably all know that so you've said it's probably just an excuse, which is I don't like getting involved in talking about testing because I don't like the sense of rejection, which is what it's really about. But it's almost like we go through the motions to spare people's feelings. We go through the motions of talking about it. But one of the things that we do, we had a couple of months ago, the continuous testing sort of day at the DevOps Institute. We had the Skill Up Day. And the conversation is always, how do we get people to accept testing? And putting it behind a paywall wouldn't be one. But most people, I think, are comfortable with building on top of it if they need to, but certainly if you ask me, Alan, do we run as many Selenium courses as I want to? No. Do I think we're running as many Selenium courses we need to? No. I think reality is whatever you're doing in the continuous testing arena, you can probably do more of it, but that's probably a personal opinion. But I know that those organizations that really get their most out of their platforms and tooling are the ones that have shifted left most of their testing, and they've embraced tools like Selenium. And I had somebody the other day, we got to the end of the course and he went, we use Selenium. I said, why didn't you say that on day one? He says, I didn't know it was called Selenium because it's so well integrated to what they're doing. It never even occurred to him.
Yeah. David, that's exactly it. I think everyone's using Selenium under the covers. They may just not realize it.
Yeah.
Guys, I want to bring up, and what time is, man, we're at almost a quarter to the hour, at 15 before the hour, and time's running. But there's another kind of area of open source and tools and platforms that I want to talk about. And that is the rise of, what we call observability. So back to our feedback loops and reiterations and so forth. We used to call it APM, Application Performance Management. And that has a rich history in open source as well. But, now we call it observability. And, we have these monster open source projects like OpenTelemetry and Prometheus, where we're measuring downloads in the tens of millions, and the users in the millions and tens of millions. And that's had a profound impact on our DevOps workflows, right? Because there's a little bit of information overload because of the amount of data that we're bringing in there. But, once we can integrate them into feedback loops, it really helps drive. Sergio, I'm going to ask you to go first this time, if it's okay, Sergio. What do you think about, observability and stuff as part of this?
Yeah, it's huge. It's probably the place where you have to start in your cloud native journey. You have to observe, and it goes into quality. We talked about the quality. Quality, it's a big issue, and it's more like an attribute that you need to learn. You already have like senior DevOps with 2 years, 3 years experience now, but they never got the chance to be exposed to lots of mistakes to learn about the quality. So the quality is always a big issue. So when you look into observability as a guarantee for that quality, the quality of your code, because you can inject it in all your environments, but most importantly is the quality of what you operate in front of your customers. This is the right way to go. You need to be able to, there are different stages, but you need to go through all the stages probably step by step. The first one is think about metrics. So you think now you have out of the box huge amount of metrics that you need to just learn how to use. Second, once you have the metrics and maybe you get rid of the noise, you might go in the dashboard phase. So you start again collecting all the dashboards from your existing space. Prometheus and Grafana are bringing a lot out of the box wonderful dashboards. And the mature projects, those that are graduated, normally when they release their software, they release the metrics and the dashboard together with the software. So it's becoming part of the offering. You don't adopt a product, but you adopt a product that covers the observability as part of their offering. So you just need to embrace that and then extend it a little bit further. Once you have the dashboards, now the alerting comes into place. You don't want to stare the screen all day long, but you want those alerts to find you. And then you can go and, of course, identify the root cause of your problem. And once you have alerts, you're going to find out that you have so much noise and you don't know what to do with most of the alerts. And who's actually going to own the alerts? Because maybe they are misplaced, they go to the wrong team. So then probably is the right moment to start the SRE journey, like really, really seriously. Maybe you had the fake SRE before, and now is the time to go into that. And that means like really solving the governance space. You need to be able to track every alert and route it to the right service and to the right owner of that service. So that's extremely important. And then if you go on that journey, why not write the run books behind your alert? So you need to have a recipe of what needs to happen when you read that alert. And later on, when you get more courageous, why don't you automate some responses to some of your alerts, but that already go in the space of AI ops? So there is a long journey that has to be taken cautiously, and you will not, again, embrace your imperfection. You will not get it right. Every single step needs to be fine-tuned in time, and you're going to come back. The more you learn, the more you're going to come back and fine-tune it. But it's extremely a valuable asset to have in your hands.
So if I can just double click on a couple of your items there, I think observability, and one of the things I get from my workshops, I ask people, how do you show this graphically? And they say Grafana. And I go, what are the alternatives? Silence. There are some tools which have just become, really? Because that's what we see it as. I love there's a video we do where a doctor says if there's more than two ways of operating, neither of them are very good. And I think things become de facto standards for a reason. And likewise, so people say to me, what can I do to make things more observable? Well, you could learn Grafana before you start, because that's probably what most people are using. And the best, we do these little videos where
David, yes?
Yeah.
Grafana is open.
Yes.
And they have low as well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we have those little, we have the little videos we watch and discussion afterwards. So if you couldn't be there at the show, you can go and listen to it. And we do one which is sort of like an open telemetry cook-off of how I got this to speak to Grafana and how that all was automated. And that consistently gets the most hands up of which was your best bit. There is this thirst for that, exactly what you were talking about, Isu. How do I make this thing over here cook off with this thing over here? And how do I connect it together? And it doesn't matter if you're doing Python in the middle. It doesn't matter if you're using Go. It doesn't really matter what you're doing in the middle to make that happen. But it's that cook off between the two or the three or the four, which really makes observability work. And I think we always had observability. We just had it in pots and we didn't join it together. I think we've been generating metrics at huge amounts, and Logstash has been keeping them happily in the background, but we haven't understood what they've really meant before. So I think the problem with observability isn't really the tooling. The problem with observability is us understanding this. And I think you're right. This is going to merge with AI ops, because the ability of AI to take that and synthesize it into something that's human consumable is massive. And I honestly think that in 10 years' time, we won't be talking about observability and AOps as two separate things. They will become the same.
I'd add one caveat to that, or not caveat, but in addition to that, generative AI and the effect that's going to have on it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The generative AI chat bot and so forth, and LMNs or LMMs is going to game change here. And quite frankly, let's not forget, right, pulling from yesterday's headlines, Cisco just paid $28 billion for Splunk.
Yes.
It's a lot of money for an observability solution. Because at the end of the day, I mean, that's where we are. I think we've had observability under different names and guises. The issue is we've never been able to deal with data sets this size, the way we are with some of these fantastic open source tools out there that are allowing us to do it. And there's a whole ecosystem around it. But that's certainly observability, part of our DevOps workflow and platforms and tools in there. We only have a few minutes left. I want to throw my other big grenade out there, and that's security. DevSecOps, right? A lot of the DevOps companies say now DevOps is DevSecOps. JFrog, for instance, one of the big DevOps companies. It's all DevSecOps. So is our friends at GitLab. CloudBeast came out and said, just a quick plug, I'm doing our annual DevOps experience, a virtual event. I think it's October 10th or 16th. You can check it out on Techstrong. But I have a CEO panel with the CEO of CloudBeast and JFrog and the CSO of GitLab and the CEO of Digital AI, two other great CEOs, and I can't remember their names right now. But anyway, it's about achieving balance in DevOps. And we're going to talk about, how big security has become in this. Mm-hmm. Again, Sergio, I'm going to ask you to kick it off. Security, open source, DevOps platforms.
It's big, and it's a big part of the problems that you have to address while building a platform engineering or doing DevOps in the right way. Because when you had personally the luxury of redefining the whole CI/CD based on open source stack, we had one exception on security. Because there is so much risk right now. Now you have most of the companies moving from a certain security environment, like on-premise, which was more or less handled decently, into a space that you don't understand. So you have CISO and you have security experts which don't understand the environment where they are operating. That is the first main problem that you have. The second, it's of course, then you want to shift left. You have a small team of DevOps supporting such a huge infrastructure and such a huge organization, maybe. So you have to shift left. But when you shift left, how do you make sure that you are aware of the productivity impact and the happiness impact on the developers? Because you can push back so much irrelevant data, and then you suffocate the whole team. And if you're not paying attention to that, you're gonna get stuck in making everyone unhappy. There will be a lot of friction, and there's no escape from that. On my case, I was happy because our CISO was extremely talented, open-minded, and we designed the CI/CD with the principles of DevSecOps from day zero, which means we address the noise, we address we had 20,000 vulnerability at one point open, and I said, do we push this left? No, so we had an open conversation. We said, no, let's not do that. We have a tool that finds everything but doesn't know anything about our context. So how do we bring that context in that sea of noise? And then we managed to reduce from 1,000 and 10 of thousands of possible alerts to tens of alerts, which had a runbook, because we took the time to write the runbooks, and then it became manageable. So it's a tricky problem, a big one that has to be addressed very carefully. in a holistic way. Now, you cannot see it in a fragmented way, and you cannot put it in the arms of people that maybe don't understand the technology that they have to operate and the new environment that they operate in.
So I think that absolutely. We have this saying, don't we? Reliability has to be a first-class customer. Well, if reliability is your first-class customer, then security has to be your star employee, because that's how you get world-class reliability in the long run. The days, Alan, when it's just our flaky code that trips us up, but there are so many bad actors and threats out there that, security has got to be in there. And if it's not, you're not looking for the reliability that you're going to get. Although I have to admit, once using our testing tools, managed to do a denial of service attack on myself. So I've probably got a history here. But the fact is that it's not you're right, Alan. It's no longer an option. It's no longer an optional thing. It's got to be there, and it's got to be there from the beginning. And we, as who take part in this, have got to have a security mindset. We've got to understand it. It's not other, and it's not them. The biggest mistake I think you can make is hide cyber behind the big red door and make it special. Yes, it gives you high wages, and yes, it's good for your salary, but it's terrible for actually making your system safer.
Agreed. You know what? Our audience, Askel's been very active today, and thank you for that. He says he doesn't think security is present enough in DevOps open source world, and it's all of our responsibility. But David, the phrase you turned there, I was dead on, and thank you for that. Guys, we're coming up on the top of the hour here. David, Sergio, I want to thank you both for taking time out of your day. You're both over in Europe. It's later in the day. I appreciate you coming on here. To our folks who are watching this live, thank you for participating, and thank you for being part of it. And for those of you who are watching this on demand, because many of you do, it's not a convenient time for you. You watch it on your time. Thank you for taking the time and watching it. Again, this was brought to you by PeopleCert and the DevOps Institute, or PeopleCert company. It's part of their Skill Up sessions. We do these pretty regularly here. The webinars are powered by our Techstrong group, and thanks for my Techstrong team for helping out. David, Sergio, again, thank you so much, and thank you for all you do as part of the DevOps Ambassador program, and we appreciate it. But for now, I think we're going to call it a day on today's webinar. I want to thank all of you who attended. Great questions again. Until next time, this is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com, PeopleCert, DevOps Institute, all of us here saying thank you, and have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.